that'll do. Hi. I'm back with another review. As promised, let's turn the music off. As promised, I've just got out of watching Terminator Dark Fate. Or the 6th Terminator film, but the 3rd canon film. Yeah, okay. This is going to be a tricky one because the film does something in its opening 5 minutes that is very difficult to actually get past. Very difficult. And it's going to be really tricky for me to not acknowledge what happens in the film in that opening 5 minutes. However, I'll see what I can do and then maybe discuss it towards the end, so as to give fair warning for a spoiler. Anyway, so Terminator Dark Fate. Where to start? Okay, so the trailers for this film have made it look absolutely terrible. In fact, the marketing overall has been really kind of misjudged, I think is a fair way to say it. Comments that Tim Miller, the director of the film, has come out and said, you know, combating internet trolls and saying that if they're not on board with the female characters in this film, specifically like Mackenzie Davis and her portrayal of Grace, who takes on the protector role in this film, then basically if you're not on board with that, or if you don't like the film, then it's because you're close-minded and misogynistic and yada yada yada, trying to basically, you know, trying to deflect the fact that if you don't like the film because it's a bad film, then your reasoning must be sinister and misogynistic in nature. Okay, that's not really a great look when you're trying to promote a new film, especially a film that has been, you know, there's been multiple reboot attempts with Terminator Salvation and Terminator Genesis. So that puts, well, it put my back up straight away, because it's kind of like, well, what if it's just a fucking bad film? Am I a misogynist because I don't like it because it's a bad film? Well, yeah, so it's not a bad film. It's misjudged, for sure. There's elements of this film that are misjudged, but if you take it as an action film, it's not bad. And you know, the reports are coming out saying it's the best film, the best Terminator film since Terminator 2. I'm likely to agree. However, when someone makes a statement like that, you have to remember, well, let's take a look at the films that have come since Terminator 2. You've got Terminator 3, which was a watered down version of Terminator and Terminator 2. You know, the jokes in there with the whole, you know, Terminator getting his glasses from a male stripper and the talk to the hand and the cheap feel of the film, and you know, the one good thing about Terminator 3 Rise of the Machines was the machines won at the end of the day. You know, Judgment Day started at the end of that film, and it gave it kind of like this kind of somber but hopeful tone right at the end of the film. It was competent, but it was just a watered down 12A version of the Terminator, which no one really needed. And Arnold only did it because he got paid a shitload of money, you know. So Terminator Salvation, that was, I know some people say it's not that bad. I just think it was the wrong direction. Again, it was a 12A film of, you know, an adult-orientated sci-fi horror, you know, franchise. It showed us the future war in daylight. Now, when I think of the future war that's depicted in the first two Terminator films, you know, it's all steel blue, set at night, in a nuclear holocaust. You can't see the sun because, you know, there's that much dust and shit kicked up in the air that sunlight can't actually penetrate through, so it's just a, you know, constant nighttime, nightmarish dystopian future. It's not a brightly lit, you know, action romp through the desert where people can pretty much move freely without fear of being caught by the HKs, which, you know, apparently used infrared to spot them with, you know, body heat. It just didn't make sense. And Christian Bale was a bad fit for John Connor. Sam Worthington isn't a leading man, you know. It was just a very muddled film and made no sense. And Skynet was apparently Helena Bonham Carter all along. Who knew? And then you get to Terminator Genesis. Now, some people didn't mind Salvation. I'm one of the few that didn't mind Genesis. I know that's probably a controversial take, but I didn't mind it. I actually don't see why so many people say it's so bad. I honestly don't think it is. I think it's mediocre, to be sure, but I don't think it's as bad as everyone makes it out to be. It did try to do something different. It made mistakes, absolutely made mistakes. And I think people kind of... One of the biggest mistakes that Genesis made was it was setting up 2 more films. You know, it was asking a lot of questions which it had no intention of answering in that one film, because it was too busy trying to set up a franchise which would never come. And in doing so, it feels unfinished. You know, it essentially breaks the timeline by making John Connor a Terminator and erasing him from that timeline. And I'm sure the story would have resolved itself if it got, you know, the 2 sequels that it was planning for. But, you know, it's kind of a cardinal sin of filmmaking. It's like, concentrate on the story that you're telling in the film that you tell, in the structure of the film that you're telling. Don't be planning the next 2 films in the story that you're trying to tell in this one, because you may not get it, and you didn't get it. So it's kind of a harsh one to, well, it's a tricky one to judge, because, like I say, the story, they were setting up the story to be resolved in 2 more films' time, which never came. So everyone who says, oh, it's shit, it broke the time, yeah, it did break the timeline, but I have no doubt that by the end of the 3rd planned film, which never happened, it would have restored the timeline in a way that would have allowed future, you know, installments, you know, a future franchise there. But that never happened because the filmmakers were too kind of, they were obsessed, you know, they were on the Marvel dick trying to create a universe in Terminator that they forgot to, you know, make a solid first film, make people want to actually come and watch 2 more films. Never happened. So here we land at yet another reboot with Terminator Dark Fate. And as I say, it's not bad. It's certainly the best Terminator film since Terminator 2. But the bar is so low that that's not really much of a statement, you know? It starts off relatively well, and I'm talking about after the first 5 minutes. It starts off relatively well. We go into an action sequence which, you know, is, by and large, it looks practical. It looks like it was done for real. Yeah, there's CG trickery in there somewhere or other, but, you know, there are practical stunts at play, which I thought, oh great, okay, we're back to, Terminator, things are done for real. Obviously there's going to be special effects in there because Terminator's a special effects franchise, but they're doing some practical stuff, some practical stunts with the driving and yada yada yada, and it was enjoyable enough. Sadly, that kind of doesn't carry through the rest of the film. As the film goes on and the set pieces get bigger and bigger and bigger, the ratio of practical to CG obviously shifts in favour of the CG, which is a real shame, because I don't think there's anything outside the realm of possibility that could have been done in the stunt work, obviously aside from crashing two massive planes into each other. When you get to that point, it doesn't feel like a Terminator film anymore. When I think of Terminator, I think of, well, certainly Terminator 2, where the focus is on, practical stunts and practical effects with, CG just kind of, or special effects just augmenting the practical stuff. If you remember when they flip the tanker over as it's going into the steel mill, you have Arnold or his stuntman on the bonnet of that truck as it flips over, and the background of the road and all of that was done with front projection, instead of green screen. And some people say that front projection looks weird. I think Cameron actually knows how to use front projection. He used it, quite a lot in Aliens. And if you match the lighting of the on-set stuff with the lighting of the stuff that's projected behind, on the screen behind, I think it's very, very kind of convincing. I certainly prefer that effect over green screen and stuff like that, because you don't get the matte lines or the blurred edges where they've tried to kind of hide the matte. So it's a technique, a cinema technique. I quite like that, and it's real. It's done in camera kind of thing. So for me, it looks more realistic. But anyway, I'm kind of going off on a tangent because I'm still trying to think of a way to not spoil. Yeah, I had a real time actually getting over that throughout the course of the film, what happens in the first 5 minutes, and it's a tricky beast. But so basically Linda Hamilton's back as Sarah Connor. This film is picking up, directly after the events of Terminator to Judgment Day. Judgment Day's averted. And Skynet doesn't take over. However, as fate would have it, the human race is still doomed. Essentially, it's Terminator 3 all over again. It's kind of like it wasn't stopped; it was just postponed, and it happens in a slightly different way. So this film isn't treading any new ground, unfortunately. It is a rehash of what's come before, and it's a case of if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And the formula, it may not be broke. However, it's tired at this stage. We've seen this happen 4 times now. Well, this will be the 5th out of 6 films. The basic story structure is Terminator sent back, Protector sent back, and essentially it's just one long chase from set piece to set piece, where the Terminator keeps catching up with Protector and Target, and they fend him off until the next set piece. That's essentially the film, and like I say, we've seen it 4 times at this point, and this is the 5th time round, and it's a tired formula. It doesn't really bring anything new to the table. The new version of the Terminator, the Rev 9, again, it's not bringing anything dramatically new to the table. It is essentially, what do we do now? How do we top ourselves? Well, you don't. Essentially, all they've done is they've taken ideas from previous films, mashed them together, and that's what you get in the Rev 9. So you get the shape-shifting abilities of the T-1000, you get the endoskeleton of the T-800 or the TX, and you smush them together. The only difference is from the TX, which was the same thing. It was an endoskeleton with liquid metal. That the two parts can operate independently and kind of team up and tag team. That is essentially the differentiating factor, the unique selling point of this new Terminator. Yeah, so we've seen that before. I do like the fact that it looks old school in the fact that it has the classic endo look. Because let's face it, the T-800 is the iconic Terminator. You know, there's a reason Arnold Schwarzenegger's defining character is the Terminator, and it's just the look of the T-800. The idea of the original T-800 is you know, that's the cultural touch point of Terminator. That's what people know. For as cool as the T-1000 was, it was just a glob of silver goo. You know, it didn't really have any personality to it beyond, you know, Robert Patrick being kind of, he had that kind of menacing quality, you know. I don't think this guy Gabriel Luna has that menacing quality, purely because literally in every set piece, and you saw it in the trailers, you know, there was, you know, this is the most dangerous Terminator ever. When, you know, you don't kill it, you run from it, and all this kind of, they build it up to be the most lethal Terminator, the most lethal machine ever created. And in every trailer, there was 3 or 4 fight scenes, you know, cut into the trailers, where it was getting its arse handed to it. It's like, well, it might be the most lethal, but it's not exactly the most effective, because it's getting the shit beat out of it constantly. And that's this film. It's constantly bested at every point by brute force. And yeah, it's relentless in the fact that it carries on going. And it is difficult to destroy. But it doesn't seem difficult to beat the fuck out of and get away from. So yeah, it just makes it ineffective, and the threat isn't there. So that's, yeah, you know, the bad guy seems quite ineffective in this. So Linda Hamilton's back. That was the big thing. You know, we've got Linda Hamilton back. I don't even know where to touch with this one. So yeah, Linda Hamilton's back, and she's kind of like, you know, kick-ass Sarah Connor, doing her best to keep on, you know, killing Terminators. She hunts Terminators in this timeline. You don't really get to see much of that. You just get an explanation. Grace, Mackenzie Davis's character, she's a human, but she's been augmented. So she's essentially got, from the look of it, like an endoskeleton inside of her, and kind of like mesh underneath her skin, and she's got hyper strength, hyper speed, all that kind of stuff. Arnold Schwarzenegger is back in what is essential. It's some people have been saying it's an extended cameo. I'd say it's a little bit more substantial than that. It's a good hour into the film before he actually turns up. So I would say his role in this is more. I mean, you know exactly where it's going when he turns it. You know exactly what's going to happen with this. Because it's the thing that needs to happen. I would say his role in this is more akin to Harrison Ford showing up in Blade Runner 2049. So, you know, extended cameo in a way, but a little bit more substantial. Because what's a Terminator film without Arnold Schwarzenegger in it? Well, it's Terminator Salvation, which didn't go down too well. Uh, for the most part, he's good because he's kind of robotic in the way that he acts anyway. So um, yeah, he's looking old though. It's harder and harder to explain that. I mean, the moment that they started turning around and saying, the flesh, the flesh sheaths that they put over the Terminator's ages because it's just normal human flesh. When you start breaking that down, it makes no fucking sense because they haven't got a digestive system. How does the skin get the nutrients that's required to keep on living? How does it not die? Because yeah, it's one of those. It's like how it just doesn't make sense when you start breaking it down like that. I know that the Terminators at one point in the franchise are referred to as like cyborgs, like cybernetic organisms, but they're really not. They're machines. They're an endoskeleton that has a skin sheath put over them, and I always preferred to think of the skin sheaths as something that would eventually die, but it would last long enough for them to carry out their objective, carry out their mission. Yeah, so we get to see an aged Terminator who has been living as a human and has his own motivations to help Sarah Connor and to help Danny Ramos, who is the new Sarah Connor, and Grace protects Danny, and yeah. Yeah, it's just a way to get Arnold in it, even though he's 72, something like that now. But people expect him to be in a Terminator film. There is some digital trickery involved in de-aging, which is actually not bad at all. I bought it. So the rumours that Edward Furlong was back as John Connor, that was hinted at by Edward Furlong himself. He does show up. Don't expect to see him, throughout the whole film, but he is in there. We do see a young Linda Hamilton again, which is it was really convincing. Yeah, I suppose I'm kind of going into spoiler territory there, but when you're dealing with a film that's dealing with timelines and stuff, then it's expected now that we've got the technology. In the same way that when I spoke about Gemini Man, the technology's there to de-age people now, so of course they're going to start using it, and they use it in a way in this film to just kind of bridge the gap, bridge the kind of like the gap between Judgment Day and obviously this film, which is set some considerable years after. Yeah, okay. So I'm not going to go into the spoiler. No, I'm not. Suffice to say, I wasn't happy with it. I remember an interview that James Cameron gave when he was asked about, Alien 3 and what he would have done with the franchise and all of this kind of stuff, and how he feels about sequels. He was being asked about what it was like working on Aliens after Alien, and how he felt after he didn't return for Alien 3 and all this kind of stuff. And he was saying that for sequels to be made, you need to not disrespect what had come before, and not disregard it and throw it away. Throw away the stuff that had come before, because you run the risk then of betraying your audience, and I feel like his stance on that may have changed now, especially with this. I don't know if that's down to the fact that there's money to be made, the way that this film plays out, and in order to continue this film franchise beyond this film, because I will say this, give the film its due, it tells its own story. in the way that Terminator Genesis didn't. It could absolutely be spun off and have further films, the way that the film has ended, but the story that is being told in this film is a whole story. So props for that. Um, they absolutely could sequelize it, or spin off into another franchise, because they've introduced a younger set of characters. So Terminator could theoretically live on. I really hope it doesn't. I hope that this is the last Terminator film. I sincerely think it's not going to be. I think in another 5-10 years we'll have another attempt at a reboot. If a sequel isn't greenlit soon for this, I suppose it all depends on how it performs, after the opening, because it's not tracking very well at the moment. And that's purely down to the marketing. As I say, they don't have a bad film on their hands here. They really don't. It's an alright action film. It's an alright action film. It starts off well, and then kind of falls into mediocre, big, crashy bang CGI spectacle, with robots in there. But it's certainly not a bad film. I don't know if that's. I think I'm being favourable because I saw something really bad yesterday in Gemini Man, but I don't think it's a bad film. I think it's alright, but that's pretty much it. It's alright. It's not overly long. It doesn't outstay its welcome, and it's alright if you can get past the opening 5-10 minutes of the film. So yeah, in that sense, it's kind of worth a watch. But I think the time I've had this conversation with a few people. I think Terminator, the original Terminator, was kind of like a product of its time. It was before the advent of, the internet. There was it was the original Terminator was kind of like a sci-fi horror film. Instead of having like Michael Myers or Jason Voorhees, we had a robot slasher, which essentially is what that film was. It was just one long chase sequence, perfect self-contained story, with kind of a slasher figure, a lumbering, never gonna stop kind of slasher, but he just so happened to be a technologically based slasher. It wasn't, some kind of supernatural force. It was technologically based, and that's what made the original Terminator unique. And then obviously when it spun off into Terminator 2 Judgment Day, it became something entirely different. It became a massive action film, and it tried subverting the expectations between having two Terminators this time, and tried playing that whole riff that two people are sent back, and because Arnold was bad last time, then he's going to be bad this time because the other guy just looks like a normal guy. So it tried. I mean, it was spoiled in the trailers, but they did try doing that. You were kind of like, oh, he's back, he's going to be the bad guy because the other guy that's travelled back through time looks, similar build to Kyle Reese. He just looks like a normal person. How could he be the bad guy? And then obviously, it was flipped around and Arnold was the protector. And to an extent, they kind of do that again this way, even to the point where they kind of flip around the arrivals, because in the first two films, Terminator 3, I'm trying to think of, but certainly in the first two films, Arnold arrived first in Terminator 1, and Kyle Reese, Michael Bihn's character, the protector, he arrives second. And in Terminator 2, again, the bad guy, the Terminator, arrived first, the T-800, and then Robert Patrick's T-1000 arrived second. In this, they flip it so that Mackenzie Davis's character arrives first, and then, the Rev-9 arrives second, and they both don't look like robots, so, anyway, I'm just waffling at this point. Okay, so let's sum it up. It's not a bad film. It's not terrible in the way that the marketing actually made it out to look. It's a competent action film, which I think some people might get something out of. So it's in that sense it's worth a watch. However, I hope this is the last one, if that makes sense. And yeah, I think Terminator's kind of done that. We've moved past the point where Terminator's relevant in today's culture because AI is becoming a realistic thing. We've got to a certain point with artificial intelligence where it's kind of a reality now. We haven't got anything that's kind of on the level of Skynet or anything along those lines. But it's we're knocking on the door, and at this point we certainly don't have any metal endoskeletons walking around the streets. It doesn't look like nuclear Armageddon is around the corner. So I think the messages that the original Terminator and Terminator 2 kind of brought aren't specifically relevant, and in that case, in that sense, the character and the idea behind Terminator isn't relevant. I know they've tried shoehorning in some political statement now by making, the savior of the human race in Danny Ramos's character Mexican, and there's a few kind of like political jabs in there at the whole state of American and Mexican relations and all that kind of stuff. I try not to pay attention to that because it's when you start throwing that kind of stuff into films, then you stop being entertainment and you start being a soapbox. This is not the film to be carrying a political statement. I don't think it's certainly not that smart. It's made as a piece of entertainment. So Terminator Dark Fate. It's a very middle of the road, competent action film. It's certainly not as bad as what the trailers have made it out to look like. So I'd say if you're curious, go and watch it. You might get something out of it. If you like the characters, it is undeniably good to see Linda Hamilton back as Sarah Connor. Even if they take the character in a direction that is kind of makes her feel a little bit superfluous and yada yada yada. Anyway, that's kind of it. I don't really. I've maybe spoiled a little bit more than what I should have, but hopefully all of the main plot points I've kind of, I really do want to talk about them, but I'll wait until the film's been out a few days and maybe I'll cover it on the podcast. So that's it. Untitled Film Podcast, we dropped a new episode last night, Hot Fuzz. If you haven't listened to that already, go and download it. Thanks for watching this. I will be back with whatever the next film is that I watch at the cinema. I don't even know what's on the horizon. Thanks for watching, guys. Until next time, bye.